Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Tiana Godsey. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the events coordinator for Natural Lands. And I'd like to welcome you to our Connect and Explore Big Trees, Big Benefits with Aaron Greenberg of PA Champion Tree Program. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Aaron, for being here to teach us about big trees. So if anyone is just joining, feel free to share in the chat at least one fun fact about yourself. Oh, excuse me, some people in the waiting room really quick. If you want to share your favorite or closest natural lands preserve, what brings you here this evening, what you're hoping to learn, or a favorite fall or winter pastime. Before we get started, just a few things to note. This event is recorded. If you need to leave the meeting, you are able to get back in through the link. We will share the recording with you after the event, usually within 7 business days. Due to the webinar style of the event, we ask you to stay muted throughout the event and please type any questions or comments in the chat. I will act as tech support and Q&A moderator at the end of our program. If you are having any technical difficulties, please feel free to message either directly to me or leave a message in the chat and I will assist you. So just quickly before we begin, I know many of you are very likely familiar with natural lands, but I'd like to give a little introduction to those who are not. We have a few new members joining us this evening, and I want to thank you for your support. We are a nonprofit organization serving Eastern Pennsylvania and Southern New Jersey to preserve and nurture nature's wonders and create opportunities for joy and discovery in the outdoors for everyone. We've been at it since the early 1950s, and today nearly 5 million people live within 5 miles of lands under our permanent protection. So how do we do it? Our mission is land for life, nature for all, and we do it through a number of ways: saving open space by permanently protecting natural areas through acquisition and voluntary land protection agreements, and by helping communities preserve more of their land. So far, we've saved more than 125,000 acres this way. We also care for nature, which we do by taking care of our network of 40 plus nature preserves and 1 public garden, located, as I mentioned, in 2 states and 13 counties, all which total over 23,000 acres. And finally, to connect people with the outdoors and each other, like we are doing tonight, even online, by creating opportunities for people to connect with and learn from nature. So, a brief moment to thank each and every one of Natural Lands members here with us today. As I noted, we are member supported, and your support makes all the stewardship work you see and all of these events possible. Thank you for the significant impact you have on our efforts to save open space, care for nature, and connect people to the outdoors. If you are not a member yet, it would mean so much to us to have you as a partner in our conservation work. Learn more and join us at natlands.org/membership. And thank you very much. The moment you have all really been waiting for is to hear from Aaron Greenberg, so I'm going to stop sharing and let Aaron introduce himself. But just briefly, Aaron comes from the PA Champions Tree Program and is here to talk about big trees, as you know. So thank you, Aaron. Very excited to learn from you.
All right. Excited to be here. Let's see.
So I didn't give you a better intro, but I figured you would do it better than yourself.
It's okay. I'll introduce myself. Can you see my screen all right? Oh,
Looking good.
great. All right. Welcome everybody. Hold on, let me see how my Zoom is blocking my thing. One moment, please. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Aaron Greenberg, and I'm here to present on big trees, big benefits. We're going to talk all about big trees today, um, the benefits they have, in other words, how they care for us, and how we can care for them, how the sort of unique situation of taking care for big trees. So I'm really thrilled to be here as part of Natural Lands. I've, been an appreciator of Natural Lands for a long time and excited to talk to you guys about big trees today. I'm going to try to also let you know what all these big trees are in all these photos. Um, the photo on the left and the right are the state champion Chinkapinno, Quercus muhlenbergii, which is in Berks County. That's known as the Sacred Oak. Um, and we'll talk more about that tree later. And this tree in the middle is the state champion black gum, Nyssa sylvatica, which is in on a private property in Phoenixville. All right, so a little bit about me. Thanks for that intro, Tiana, and I'll give you a little bit about my background. This is me over here on the left with the long beard, as you can see. I got into the sort of plant world through organic farming. I wanted to be a farmer until I realized how uh, crazy all the farmers I worked for were, and I decided, maybe this isn't for me. Um, Big love to all the farmers out there who grow our food, but I decided that wasn't my path. And so I started to learn about trees. I did an internship at the Morris Arboretum, and I from there, worked for Bartlett Tree Experts for a little bit. I worked at Mount Cuba Center for a little bit, and finally landed my job at Laurel Hill, where I work now. If you're not familiar with Laurel Hill, it's a pair of historic cemeteries. One's in Philadelphia, one's in Ballot-Kinwood, and together we form one 265-acre accredited arboretum. So I'm the arboretum director for Laurel Hill, and I oversee the landscape and the arboretum there. So that's my job now. I never thought I'd be planting flowers in graves, but here I am, and I get to maintain and take care of all of the trees there. I've been there for about 9 years, and I've done a lot of learning about trees there as well. I also, in my spare time, volunteer as a state coordinator for the PA Champion Tree Program. And it's really in that capacity that I'm talking to you tonight because we're going to talk about big trees. And here's me with a monster sycamore I measured right next to a creek in Bucks County. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Here's that state champion black gum again. Isn't that an incredible tree? Um, an overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, we'll talk about why big trees are important. We're going to talk about their human health value, their sort of dollars and cents value, their ecological value. Then we'll talk about how we can care for big trees when we see big trees in the landscape, whether they're at a preserve or in people's homes. What can we do to maintain and keep big trees living? And then we'll talk about some programs that exist to sort of promote and care for and educate us about big trees. And yeah, that'll be what we talk about today. I will say too, I know we're going to have time for questions at the end. Um, Tiana, if something comes up in the chat that seems like it's really relevant to the slide we're on, I'm happy to be interrupted and answer a question. All right, so big trees equal big value. We all know trees are important, right? And these bigger trees really have big value. They have value for properties, they have values for human health, value as temperature regulators, they have immense cultural value in our culture and society, and they have huge ecological value. So we're going to talk about each one of those things that is sort of contributes to the big value of big trees. Um, so trees improve property value. Depending on who you ask and where you are, the increase in property value can change, but USDA says mature trees add 10% to your property value. ICMA says um, landscaping with trees can add as much as 20%. And there's a whole system now in the International Society of Arboriculture for appraising trees. And trees can appraise at from 1,000 to 10,000 values. So having mature trees on our properties does raise the property value. And here's a picture on the right of my neighborhood. I live in West Philadelphia, and this gorgeous yellow flowering hybrid magnolia is increasing, the value of not only that home that it's in front of, but really the whole neighborhood. Trees improve mental and physical health, and this we could probably do a whole talk just on the human health impacts of trees. But the study of trees and human health really came into the public eye from this study that was published in Science in 1984 about folks recovering from surgery in a hospital. And they compared folks who were recovering that had a view of trees um, outside their window versus folks that had a view of a parking lot or a brick wall. And those folks that had a view of trees and a view of nature out their window had significantly shorter recovery times from surgery. And that sort of got people to really look at and study that more. And I know you all can read this quote, but I'm just gonna read it because I think it's really powerful. And this is from Harvard School of Public Health. Trees' effects on us translate into long-term changes in the incidence of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline, and chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease and cancer. So that's a powerful quote from Harvard there, just saying that trees really have this positive impact on human health. And that's something we can kind of anyone probably coming to this talk maybe feels that intuitively, right? We just feel better physically, mentally, emotionally when we're around trees. But more and more, there's research to really back that up. And that's why, I bring my family and encourage them to touch trees all the time. And that's my little son visiting the Woodland Cemetery and sort of loving up on the state champion Caucasian Zelkova tree. We also know that trees are really important for regulating temperature. Um, this again is something we know intuitively, but there's science to back it up. Here's from USDA. The net cooling effect of young, healthy trees is equivalent to 10 room-size air conditioners operating 20 hours a day. That is wild to me. Um, you know, Dr. Greg McPherson, who was a urban forest researcher, a pioneering urban forest researcher, showed that if you plant a tree today, as that tree goes, each year it can lead to real decreases in your energy spending just by the shading effects of that tree near a house. So big trees really have this immense shading effect. And they were the original heaters and air conditioners. In fact, oftentimes, this is a little bit of a tangent, but oftentimes when I go to find big old historic trees, they are found at the southwest or southeast corner of a historic building. And the reason is because those trees, when their leaves were off in the winter, they allowed a lot of solar radiation to come hit the house. And then during the summer, they had, big leafy canopies, which would cool the house. So just planting trees was sort of the original way to air condition and optimize heating for your home. Um, I want to show you this map too. There was a really interesting study, and I'm sorry I don't have the numbers here, but Philadelphia, in preparation for preparing for the Philly tree plan, did this surface temperature study showing the surface temperature in neighborhoods that had fewer trees versus high trees. And as you would expect, um, neighborhoods with fewer trees and less tree canopy had much, much higher, oh, I'm sorry, much, much higher surface temperatures. And I should have these numbers here, but there was the difference between neighborhoods in Philadelphia and in the Philadelphia area, neighborhoods with no to very little tree canopy versus the most tree neighborhoods on the hottest days of the year was up to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, meaning the temperature on the street in leafy canopied Chestnut Hill on the hottest day of the year was at about 80 degrees, whereas the temperature in North Philly, where there was no trees at all, was almost 120 degrees. So really, really stark data showing the importance of tree canopy. Trees also, as I mentioned, have immense cultural value. Okay. Trees, especially big old trees in our landscape, they tell a story, right? They inspire us. And these are all photos of that sacred oak of the Ole Valley that I showed you in the first slide, too. Um, and this tree is a tree that was sacred to the Lenape people who um, lived here uh, before colonization and continued to be sacred to the generations of people who lived in this area for over 500 years. It's estimated to be over 500 years old. And these black and white photos are from books. This one's from 1932 and this one's from 1982 at the 250th and the 300th anniversary of the founding of the Commonwealth. They released these books, and this oak tree was in both of these books, these Penn's Woods books, and you can see, people have been coming to visit this tree for a long, long, long time, bringing their children there. Here's a Boy Scout troop that did signage and sort of cleared around the tree so folks could visit. It's now on private property, but they do several times a year allow people to visit, and people come. And when you're standing next to this tree, you can feel this sort of power and the sacredness of this tree, and it connects you with the history of the place, right? And it connects. It's a way to connect people to nature.
Aaron, really quick, before you get too far ahead, we did have one question. Actually going back one more slide, but you were going off about that oak is beautiful. I have to go see that immediately. But Cynthia asked a really good question about do more asphalt and roads contribute to the higher surface temps too?
Yeah, absolutely. You have this thing called the urban heat island effect, right? So all the black asphalt and roads really heat up a city. And that's also why that's another reason why trees help, right? Because leafy canopies absorb sunlight and 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 use that to create energy versus the sun just hitting the pavement and radiating that heat throughout the neighborhood. So yeah, the all the blacktop really heats up cities. It's interesting. I mentioned, the two cemeteries I work at, one's in Philly, one's in Bala Cynwyd. And the Philadelphia cemetery, um, is warmer than the Bala Cynwyd Cemetery, even though they're only a few miles apart. And the reason is because of that urban heat island effect. All that paving heats things up. So things flower at different times. I can get away with growing sort of more southern plants at the Philadelphia Cemetery than at the Bala Cynwyd Cemetery because it's just a few degrees hotter over there. It's really an interesting thing. But obviously, the more trees you have, the more shade and the less that urban heat island effect happens.
Awesome, thank you. I
Mhm.
appreciate that. And I'm sure you'll get to this one, but just in case, how do you define a big tree?
Mm. It's subjective. And in terms of right now, what we're talking about mostly is the value of like large diameter trees. There's a number of ways to measure trees. You measure the diameter, you measure the height, measure the canopy spread. The diameter of the trunk is sort of the primary measurement. That's the sort of forestry standard. Um, and you can set that at anything, but we're really talking about trees that are, medium to large size. So, um, yeah, I don't want to fully define it because you're going to see some analysis in a minute that defines it as 10 inches or more, or even 5 inches or more. What we're not talking about is little newly planted trees, although it's important to plant trees. That's not the discussion today.
Perfect, thank you.
And I will say that the PA Big Tree Program is a list of all the largest trees of a species, right? So we list the largest redbud, which is not very big, but what I'm more talking about right now are really, really large canopy trees. big, oaks, sycamores, large maples, things like that. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So, and the other main value that trees have is their ecological value. Okay. And that's really sort of for our purposes today, what I want to drive home is that these large trees have immense ecological value. Um, First of all, they have huge value for wildlife. As trees uh, grow and get older, um, first of all, there's some basic math that just multiplies their value for things like pollinators and herbivores. Okay, so this pollinator in this picture is on a little flowering plum tree, but you can imagine that multiplied by a giant tree when they're in bloom. Trees that are insect pollinated are have huge nectar and pollen sources for pollinating insects. So while planting pollinator gardens and herbaceous plants is super important, it's also important to plant trees that have high pollinator value. And the bigger those trees get, the more exponentially more flowers they have for pollinators. And trees like red maple, for example, which are flowering, in February into March, are a huge resource for um, pollinators that are waking up on warm days that don't have other nectar and pollen resources to go to. The other thing is that as trees get larger, they they go through life, right? They're have storms. Maybe they're on a property and they get pruned, and this leads to decay. And decay means cavities in the tree. So usually those cavities are opened up by woodpeckers and smaller insects, and then they get taken advantage of by things like our little raccoon friend here. Um, and they become habitat for larger wildlife. Um, small trees, even though they're great, are not great habitat for larger wildlife. But the larger trees get, the more diversity of animals they can support, especially just because of the size of their canopy, and because of the presence of these cavities. And then trees beyond the wildlife value also do a ton of work in terms of carbon sequestration, stormwater mitigation, and filtering pollution. And we're gonna talk about that and look at some numbers now too. So a friend of mine, Corey Bassett, who was an intern with me at Morris Arboretum, she was the urban forestry intern and I was the arborist intern. She did her master's of environmental studies at Penn. And while she was there, she did this really interesting study on UPenn campus. Okay. And she looked at this area, which is photographed here in this terrible photograph, this area called Shoemaker Green. And in Shoemaker Green, they were redoing this new quad and new lawn, and they wanted to totally redo the landscape. And you can see back here there were six large trees. These were all London plane trees, okay? Not the biggest trees in the world, but they were big, mature trees. And the university was questioning, should we cut these down too and just totally restart new with our landscape? We are going to plant trees, or should we retain these trees? And Corey used this program called iTree. And what iTree does is it takes a lot of research and a lot of background work that was done by urban foresters, and it quantifies the ecological value of trees. So you take some basic measurements, you take the diameter measurement, the height measurement, you plug in the species, um, and it'll spit out to you all this information about the ecological value of trees. And she found that these six large trees on Shoemaker Green had equal ecological value to 1,316 small newly planted trees. Okay, so these six big trees had the same ecological value as over 1,300 small newly planted trees. So when we hear people say, "Oh, we're going to cut down this big tree, it's okay, we'll plant a new tree to replace it," it's not a one-to-one comparison there in terms of the actual current ecological value of those trees. Sometimes you have to take down trees, you have to plant trees. That's imperative for our ecological future. But we really have to think about this immense ecological value that we're losing every time we remove a tree. All right, so I thought Corey's research was really interesting, and I decided to do the same sort of analysis for the tree canopy at Laurel Hill, where I work. Okay, so on the left here is is all the trees in our tree collections, about 4,000 trees. And what you have here are I fed all those the data for all those 4,000 trees into iTree, and what you have here are the values that iTree gives you. Okay, so it gives you um, oh, it gives you the carbon dioxide that is sequestered by these trees annually. It's almost 1 million pounds of carbon dioxide. It gives you the stormwater benefits. So this is the water that's saved from going into the stormwater system. The potential energy benefits. This is relative to buildings. And the air quality benefits, the number of pounds of pollutants that are removed from the atmosphere, and the potential property value benefits of these trees. Okay, and not only does it give you numbers for each of those things, but it translates each of those into a dollar amount, and then it totals that dollar amount into a total sort of ecological benefit. And I don't think the actual number is as important as seeing as the fact that there is a number to quantify the ecological benefit. So these 4,000 trees have an ecological benefit equal to about $340,000. Now, on the right, I did an analysis where I only looked at large trees, and in this case, I defined a large tree as anything in 5 inches in diameter or bigger. Okay, so not very big, but I just wanted to exclude the very small trees in our collection. So we looked at the um, only trees that were 5 inches or larger. And what that gave us is about 2,500 trees, which represents 63% of our tree collection. So 63% of our trees are 5 inches or bigger. Now, those 63% of trees were responsible for 99% of the carbon dioxide that was sequestered, 98% of the potential energy benefits, and 98% of the pollutants that were taken from the atmosphere, and 98% overall of the ecological benefits of our trees were encompassed by the 63% of our trees that were large. So I hope I explained that well enough. Essentially, it's about 60% of our trees that are large, but they encompass almost all of the ecological benefits in terms of carbon, energy benefits, and pollutants. And you can extend that analysis a little bit further. And I promise this is the last chart or graph, and then we're going to go back to pictures of trees. But what you see here is so on this is what we just looked at. Any tree that is 5 inches in diameter or larger, it's 63% of our collection, 98% of the benefits. Well, what if you look at trees that are 10 inches in diameter or larger? That's only about 50% of our tree collection, but it's 95% of the benefits. What about even larger, 20 inches in diameter? That's only 30% of trees. You're still at 80% of the benefits. All the way down to our very largest trees, which are 50 inches or larger. That's only 3% of the trees, but it's over 10% of the benefits. So if you look at those larger trees, those 50 uh, inch or larger diameter trees, it's only 114 trees, but the benefit per tree is 332 versus our smallest trees. It's over 1,000 trees, but the benefit is only $6 per tree per year. So these large historic veteran trees have up to 53 times the ecological benefit per tree compared to the smallest trees. So we know big trees are valuable. Um, we really need to retain them in our landscape whenever we can. How do we do that? Big trees need big work, okay? And sometimes people can be daunted by how do we care for these big, historic, aging trees? The first thing we do is do an assessment of the tree. We assess its health and we assess the risk it might pose. Tiana, I think we have one person in the waiting room. Then I'll talk a little bit about interventions we can do in terms of pruning, mechanical interventions, and very importantly, soil maintenance. I will then talk about plant health care, which can be a really important thing for trees in terms of pest treatments and again, soil. So we've established the benefit of big trees. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how we take care of them. So the very first thing you want to do when considering caring for a big tree is to do what's called a risk assessment. This is a process for analyzing the health of a tree and any risk it might pose. So there's arboricultural standards for assessing risk, and certain arborists can get this tree risk assessment qualification. Okay. So when you're assessing trees for risk, you're looking at two things. What are the hazards? What are the hazards that this specific tree poses? And what are the targets? If this tree or part of this tree should fail, what would it hit? And what would the impact of that hit be? And you look at those together. When you're doing the tree risk assessment in the track method, you use these matrices, okay? So you look at the likelihood of failure, the likelihood of this tree part to fail, and the likelihood of, if that tree were to fail, the likelihood that that failure would impact a target. And that feeds into this matrix, and you get unlikely, somewhat likely, or very likely. And then your results of that matrix feed into this matrix, and you look at the consequences of failure. So if this tree were to fail, if it were to impact a target, what would the consequences of that impact be? So that depends on how big the tree is, or the part that could fail, and also what the target is. So, for example, here's a large magnolia, beautiful large Yulon magnolia at Laurel Hill East Cemetery. And it's got this big cavity at the base. And so that it's a potential hazard. It's got a potential weakness here. Um, and it's also has some significant potential targets. Okay. There's some priceless historic monumentation all around it. And there's also an internal cemetery road right here where people walk, they walk their dogs, and people drive cars and ride bikes. So we're looking at how likely is this tree to fail? If it fails, how likely is it to hit one of these targets? If it hits one of these targets, what's the consequence of that? What's the severity of that? And that all feeds into how we assess risk. Then we have to consider our risk tolerance. Okay, how much risk can we tolerate in our landscape? There's no such thing as living with a tree that's completely free of risk. Okay. Um, Try as we might, we cannot see inside trees. We don't know what the weather is going to do. Trees that look perfectly healthy topple in storms, and trees that look terrible live for decades. So you living with trees is living with a certain amount of risk. And it's up to any homeowner, any landowner, any organization with trees to determine what their tolerance for risk is. Can you tolerate a little bit of risk? Or not. If you're talking about a tree in a playground, your risk tolerance might be much lower than a tree, out in the middle of the cemetery. Once you do that, you can think about, okay, there's a certain amount of risk here. What can I do to mitigate that risk? Is there anything that can be done to make risk or the potential hazard of this tree lower so that we can retain the tree and we don't have to cut it down. Because as we've seen, these big trees have big benefits. We don't want to lose them if we can. So, what are some interventions we can do to prolong the life of big old trees? One thing we can do is hazard pruning. So that's what I was talking about in terms of mitigating risk, right? If there's a big, as if there's a tree and it's got big overextended limbs over a home, the home is the target. Those hazards can be pruned out. There's big dead wood that can be pruned out. There's also what's called reduction pruning or retrenchment pruning. And there's an example of this in this photo here. You can see this big old tree, which is over a house. And this tree got pruned to remove some of the live tissue of the tree to do what's called retrenchment. And it brings the canopy from way out here and makes the canopy smaller. And that makes the risk less. It makes the all the forces of wind and weather on that tree lower. And it makes that tree less likely to break apart in storms. It also um, is just less energy for that tree to be managing that much. You know, one of the reasons that big trees age out and decline is because their canopies are so huge that even just maintaining that amount of wood and living tissue can be very taxing on the tree's resources, especially in times of drought and conditions like we've been having. So here's a quote from Ed Gilman, who's like the pruning guru in arboriculture. It says, larger, very old trees can often be reduced in lieu of removing them. This reduces the risk of failure while allowing people to enjoy the attributes of large or very old trees. So, I don't take pruning lightly. Anytime you prune a tree, you're making a wound on that tree and stressing the tree. But if the alternative is complete removal, then pruning can be a good alternative to that and really prolong the life of the tree and allow it to live a little bit longer. There's also what we call mechanical interventions for big old trees that can help, again, prolong this tree by limiting the way that the trees are affected by weather. And these images are taken straight from the best management practices of the International Society of Arboriculture. So there's tree propping. If trees have, like, for example, this cartoon of a tree has this big old low limb that has a big crack in it, and actual mechanical props can be used to keep that limb up. There's bracing with what are called bracing rods. So in a tree like this that has codominant leaders and a weak attachment between two big main trunks, you can actually drill a hole through and attach a steel rod that goes through both through the main trunk of the tree and another one a little bit above the tree. And it's been shown to actually help protect that tree from further splitting apart. Again, not something you would do to a perfectly healthy tree. You wouldn't just make holes in it and stick rods through. But a tree that's starting to decline or starting to break apart, you can prolong its health by doing interventions like this. Probably the most common one is cabling. And cables are installed by climbers further up in the canopy of the tree, about two-thirds of the way between where branches split and the top of the crown. And cabling branches can be really super helpful in, again, uh, mitigating the effect of wind, strong wind forces that might uh, put stress on the top of that canopy and through leverage put a lot of stress on these lower connections. There's also lightning protection, okay? Big trees, especially tall trees in a landscape, are susceptible to lightning strikes. Here's a picture of a tree, Kentucky coffee tree at the cemetery that got struck. And lightning can strike the top of a tree, and because trees in their bodies have columns of water that they're bringing up from their roots to the top, The lightning charge travels along those columns of water and can travel all the way down the tree in a spiral fashion and can do a lot of internal damage to the body of a tree. Lightning protection can be done on trees by um, installing essentially what are these copper terminals. This is a very sort of intensive intervention, but it can be done. You install these terminals at the top of a tree. A copper cable goes all the way down the length of the tree and then down into the ground and to another copper rod that is buried in the earth. And that way, if a lightning strike happens, it hits the metal and travels down the metal instead of traveling inside of the tree. And this is something that works. It's an intensive intervention. It's very expensive. I wouldn't recommend it except for really high value trees in that are really tall in areas that are prone to um, lightning. But I put it in there because it's actually a cool intervention that can be done to help save trees. By far, in my opinion, by far the most important thing we can do to protect and preserve our large, old, historic trees is care of their root zone. The number one killer of big old trees is compaction. I don't have science to back that up, but that's just my opinion. Um, many big old trees like this in our landscape, they may be out in seas of turf with lawnmowers driving around them. They may, or people walking around them, or vehicles, God forbid, driving on their root zones. And that can cause major compaction. And compaction can limits the amount of oxygen available in the soil and can really cause the downfall of trees. So wherever possible, I encourage people with big trees to mulch around the base of the tree. Don't have turf going right up to the base of your tree, because that if you have turf, you have to mow it, right? So mulch, you can use triple gown mulch, regular mulch. You can use regular wood chips that come right out of the chipper. I really like, and I've been advocating recently for leaf mulch. That's what trees have in the forest, right? They have leaf mulch. Deciduous trees drop their leaves and they mulch themselves. And leaf mulch is really good at retaining moisture, adding organic material to the soil, promoting a good fungal environment, and um, and just improves the health and vitality of trees. In situations like this, where trees have been compacted for a long time, you can do what's called root zone aeration or decompaction. And in that process, you can do root zone invigoration. So that's what these guys are doing here. These folks on this side are spreading compost, and this guy's using a tool called an air spade to blast high pressure air into the root zone, incorporating the compost into the soil, invigorating it with more organic matter, and decompacting at the same time. Then after they did that, we put a big mulch ring around this tree so that the mowers wouldn't continue to run over it. So anytime an intervention can be done like this would be the number one thing I would recommend for maintaining our trees is protect the root zone. And I know that the big oak at Bryn Coed Preserve is protected by a big fence all around its drip line. So folks can't just go up to it. Even though we love to go up to trees and touch trees, that is a move to really protect the root zone and that fragile root ecosystem of that tree. Another important thing that can be really important for caring for large trees is plant health care. Um, like it or not, there are a ton of invasive pests and diseases in our environment, and um, uh, most of this cannot isn't really homeowner stuff, but a professional arborist company can do PHC or plant health care, and that means pest control, disease control, even in that kind of invigoration with nutrients in the root zone. All of that can be part of a sort of pest an IPM or integrated pest management um, system for trees on the landscape. Where I work at Laurel Hill, we do a lot of our PHC in-house, and here's some photos of our interns doing it. So here's a uh, beech tree that Brendan here is spraying phosphorus on to protect it against phytophthora or root rot. And this is an ash tree that's being treated for emerald ash borer. And I believe I have a few slides here on some common pests and diseases that we're facing right now and what we can do to sort of preserve trees. So yes, here's an example and that we've all know about at this point, and that's emerald ash borer, right? It's a insect that's ubiquitous in the environment. It's a boring insect. If you ever see this little guy emerging from an ash tree, it's too late to treat it. But ash trees can be treated to protect them from emerald ash borer. And I don't advocate by any means for protecting every ash tree um, in the environment. It's not a practical thing to do on a natural land scale. But in a case like this, look at the size of this white ash. I mean, it's just an enormous tree. This tree's on the big tree list. It's at Laurel Hill. And if we were to let this tree die from emerald ash borer, we would be losing an enormous amount of canopy and all the canopy benefits, all that carbon sequestration, all that stormwater mitigation that we're getting from this enormous, mature 100 to 150-year-old ash tree would be lost. So while I don't promote, a ton of chemical use, in this situation, we can do trunk injections with a insecticide called emamectin benzoate, and that's what they're doing here. You drill little holes in the base of the trunk, and the small amount of chemical just stays in these tubes and gets taken up by the tree through the vascular system of the tree, and big trees like this can be preserved. There's no end in sight for emerald ash borer. It's here and probably here to stay. So these big mature trees we'll be treating every 2 to 3 now we treat every 3 years and we get effective control, but we get to maintain that part of our canopy. Bacterial leaf scorch is a tough one that's affecting all the oaks and the red oak group. That's a bacterial pathogen and it's spread by leaf hoppers. Um, There are injections you can do for bacterial leaf scorch, but they don't work that well. They essentially delay the symptoms, but they don't treat the disease. It's like taking NyQuil when you're sick. It makes you feel better for a little bit, but it doesn't actually solve anything, right? Um, and trees that are infected with this disease can die slowly over 10 or 15 years. It's really an unfortunate bacterial disease. One of the things, though, that has been shown to be effective in boosting trees' immune system and promoting their natural ability to resist diseases like this are root zone interventions. So doing decompaction, making sure trees have healthy root zones, allow them to have the sort of capacity to resist a lot of these diseases. And the newest one on the block that we all are hearing about is beech leaf disease. This affects every beech in the genus Fagus that we're aware of. It's caused by a nematode and it causes these striping. I'm sure everyone's seeing it at all the preserves that you love to visit, and it's very heartbreaking. They're still doing a lot of research on beech leaf disease and what can be done about it. I'm afraid there's not much that can be done on a big natural land scale, but for big specimen trees in parks and gardens and homes, there are now chemical treatments available, including one that's a spray called broadform, which is okay for smaller trees, and probably what's going to be is these macro injections, that's how we treat American elm trees for Dutch elm disease, and that's going to be the new treatment for beech leaf disease. All right, that's the last bummer of a slide here. Um, there are big trees also can have big programs to help them, and that includes tree ordinances, protections for heritage trees, construction requirements, and then besides those local resources, there are state resources in Pennsylvania too to sort of help educate and promote the value of big trees. Um, I can't stress enough the importance of local tree ordinances, and wherever you live, your municipality probably has these. Okay, so there's many different kinds. I'm by no means an expert in tree ordinances, but here's sort of an overview. Some of them are woodland conservation tree ordinances that are for public woodlands, but also extend to individual lots. Many municipalities have require permits for removing what are called heritage trees, and everyone sort of defines this differently. But again, it's how do you define a big tree, right? So each municipality decides, a tree with an X number of inches of DBH, which is diameter at breast height, or larger, can be removed. Um, and then tree removal in many of these ordinances, especially big tree removal, will trigger the requirement to replant trees. Some ordinances require a certain number of those replanted trees to be native. Some ordinances really limit on woodland that can be disturbed, and especially any natural areas that can be disturbed that are along streams and steep slopes, because stormwater is a huge thing in our area now. And this last one, I think probably one of the most important ones is trees being protected during construction. So most municipalities now will have some sort of, maybe they have a township arborist or they contract with an urban forester who creates ordinances about construction. And that means that, if you were to do construction on this house, you'd have to set up what's called a tree protection zone in the root zone of this tree that the heavy equipment can't roll on, that can't be disturbed during construction, because again, all that equipment and all that construction activity can cause a lot of compaction. So if somebody's doing construction and they're going to retain trees within the limit of disturbance of that construction project, they need to put tree protection uh, fencing up around a tree. And then there's some more statewide programs, and these are really more sort of resources for further education about trees and big trees. The PADCNR has a ton of great resources on their website. They list species that are threatened. They have lists of invasive species. They have lots of information about trees. Penn State offers a ton of seminars just like this on a variety of topics, and you can get on their email list and get educated about their seminars. Um, PHS has programs, Morris Arboretum has classes, all with the purpose of educating people about trees and so that we can protect these trees. And then, of course, there's the PA Champion Tree Program. And this photo right here is the largest tree in Pennsylvania. Um, this is the Kimberton sycamore. And I don't know if I can give a little preview, but we're actually going to be doing a big tree walk through natural lands of Bryn Coed Preserve. And this tree happens to be on a private property right next to Bryn Coed Preserve, and we're going to be able to take that tour to visit this tree. It's the largest tree in the state. It's a sycamore that's over 30 feet in circumference, 120 feet tall, and 120 feet in canopy spread. So that's a little plug for our tour that's coming up this spring that is going to be really fun. We're going to do a big tree walk and look at the big trees at Bryn Coed, and then walk over and check out this amazing Kimberton sycamore. But the Big Tree program, just a very basic overview of what it is. It's a program of PFA, which is the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. It's been going on for over 50 years. And the point is that it's a community resource, right? It's a way for people around the state who know about a big tree, maybe they have one on their property, to submit their tree, take some basic measurements with basic tools, and submit their tree to the program and get it recognized as one of the largest trees for that species in the state. And here's two tulip trees that were submitted, one in Lebanon County and one in Philadelphia County. And look how happy all these folks are to be submitting and proposing and, nominating the big trees on their landscapes. And they should be because they have these really incredible treasures. And now they're a resource for everyone in the state. So the Big Tree program essentially is a big database. You can go to pabigtrees.com and look up information about all the largest trees in the state, where those trees are, and you can search by county if you want to. And I'm not advocating anybody trespass on private property to visit any of these trees, but people can visit the trees in public parks or talk to your neighbors and see if you can visit their trees. There's about 2,000 trees on this list, and the point is it's an asset. It's available data for school groups or anybody in the Commonwealth who's interested in big trees and wants to learn more about them. And with that, I think I'm done, and I have a few minutes for questions.
Amazing. Thank you for plugging the sycamore surprise too. Very excited to see that tree in person. So yes, if you're able to join us, we have that date. It's not online yet, but May 16th. So please come on out. We did have a couple questions come in. Um, ooh, we had one about in retrenchment pruning. If you retrenchment prune, not sure if that's grammatically correct. Uh, do you lose the bunch of benefits of it being a big tree?
Um, yeah, so it's all about trade-offs, right? I wouldn't advocate for retrenchment pruning unless it was necessary to prolong the life of the tree and avoid removal, right? So if you have to remove the tree, you lose all the benefits. If you can prolong the life of the tree by doing retrenchment pruning, um, which, a good, knowledgeable, and reputable arborist could recommend whether that would help you prolong the life of a tree, um, then you get to keep, maybe it's less benefits than that tree had before, but you still get to keep the tree and it still retains, good amount of that benefit. It's a great question though.
So thank you. Um, Also in that vein, when you prune trees, does that remove the leaves?
Yes, of course it does. Um, yeah, but and again, like I
Trade-offs.
said, every pruning cut you make is a wound on the tree, and you remove some of that tree's photosynthetic capacity by removing leaves. But, we if we want to live in close relationships with trees in our, public landscapes and in our homes, oftentimes pruning is necessary to be able to live in close proximity with those trees. You don't have to prune trees out in a natural area, and I wouldn't advocate that you do so. But, if you're living close to trees, you have to think about hazards and weigh those hazards against the health effects of the tree.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah,
Mhm.
you'll see a lot of our just for natural lands management practices, often we'll reroute a trail around a tree instead of pruning it. We'll do pretty much anything we can to avoid the hazard tree having to get pruned. But if there's nothing we can do, we're obviously going to take people's safety as the first concern. But if you ever see a rerouted trail, it could be because of a big tree. Look around. Um, Another good question, how would you know if compaction is the problem for a particular tree?
Hmm, that's a great question. Um, a lot of times you can look at context, right? Um, you could, for instance, this tree in this picture, if this tree started to decline, this tree is in a public park in a really urban area with no it's got a little wall that was built next to it. You could use sort of the context clues to think, okay, there's kids playing around this all the time. It's constantly being compacted. They cut roots to make a foundation for this little wall, and that's going to be probably what is creating that problem. Now, I think for the most part, on a private landscape or in a natural land, people walking around a tree is not going to create a huge compaction problem, um, because there's just not that many people walking around that tree very much. I think there's compaction is often much more of an issue from vehicles and construction equipment and mowers. Um, but yeah, I think, once a tree starts to decline or so the canopy starts thinning or it's showing some signs of stress, that's where you look for context clues like, okay, is there any sign of what's going on in the root zone that I could potentially think, oh, there's probably some compaction going on there.
Great, thank you. If hiring a tree expert, what certifications should you look for?
Um, Look for an ISA certification uh for tree experts. So ISA is the International Society for Arboriculture, and they have a certified arborist certification. I would look for that. They there are also higher levels of certification, specific specialties, and then there's board certified master arborist, which you can, if somebody has that, you can really assume that they know their stuff. But a certified arborist in general is a good thing to look for in companies that hire certified arborists or get their arborist certified, are going that extra mile. I will say too that if you're using a consulting arborist, okay, and there are consulting arborists that aren't associated with tree care companies, so that's an option. There's also a certification for those called RCA, or Registered Consulting Arborist. So that's another thing you can look for.
Awesome. Thank you. Do you like the iTree algorithm?
I do. I think it's very useful. It's good to have a way to quantify the value of trees. And having learned a little bit about what went into creating that, I mean, it's incredibly impressive. I mean, I'm talking about grad students taking a small tree and, in the name of science, pulling every leaf off of that tree, measuring it, and then doing chemical assays to figure out how much carbon that a tree of that size is holding. So, I mean, there's significant research. Now, did they do that for every species of tree for every size? No, but they were able to do it enough to sort of make these really cool assessments. And honestly, I think it's a really valuable tool to show people the value of trees, because not everyone, I mean, everyone here, I assume, loves trees who showed up for this talk tonight. Not everyone in the world understands the value of trees. So to have numbers to put into it, carbon dioxide numbers, which are really hot to think about, to have dollars and cents to show a board of directors or a government body to say, hey, this is the actual value of these trees, is, I think, really powerful.
Yeah, that was so impressive to see it broken down like that. And I mean, like, I know the value of a trees is amazing, but being able to show that to somebody who may not know is pretty wonderful. Rob asked, how do you know you haven't identified the largest tree of a species in PA? Does this represent all of the forest cover in PA or just in well-known forest?
So we don't know. All we have in the Big Tree program is the trees that have been submitted to that program. So the state champion sycamore, that Kimberton sycamore, is the biggest sycamore in PA that we know of, right? It could be that there's one hiding out there that is larger.
Go
Um,
measure your sycamores.
yeah, measure your trees. It's probably not bigger than that, but
Doubtful, but
um, but uh but we all we have on that list are what, citizens of the Commonwealth, including, some trained foresters and arborists, have submitted to the program.
makes it kind of like a community science effort in a way, as well as scientists. Yeah,
That's right.
very cool. Um, by the way, love the Lansdowne sycamore. Yay, somebody's already seen it, so please still come to our field trip though. Our or Lansdowne, probably not the same one as
Not the
Kimberton,
same one. The Lansdowne sycamore
different
is the
one.
one in this last photo here. That's in
Ah, that is
the
gorgeous. I really love sycamores. The bark is stunning. Mary Ann asked, are the benefits of evergreen trees equal to the benefits of deciduous trees?
Wow. Thanks, Marianne. That is a great question. I love when someone asks a question that I don't know the answer to.
We
Uh,
got you. I'm just kidding.
yeah, you got me on the last one. Great.
Last one.
No, it's I will tell you that my assumption is no, because deciduous trees have just much broader leaf surface area, and a lot of the quantification of the of this ecological value has to do with leaf surface area. But I don't know that, and it would be really interesting to see an analysis, an eye tree analysis that compared deciduous to evergreen trees. Um, yeah, great question.
Very cool. Maybe a research study at some point.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so much, Aaron. This
Yeah,
was really wonderful. And as we mentioned, please join us in May for our tour at Bryn Coed. And I feel like there could be more to come with Aaron. So, oh, the final question I had was
yeah.
actually, I saved this for last because do you ever give tree tours or walks at Laurel Hill Cemetery? And I
Oh,
kind of
yes.
wanted to selfishly be like, could we do a natural lands field trip there with you?
Yeah, totally. There is there is a, first of all, we're going to do this great walk for natural lands in the spring. We're going to do, if anyone's a Stoneleigh volunteer, we're going to have a tour of Laurel Hill for Stoneleigh staff and volunteers in June. And yes, I do public tree tours at Laurel Hill.
I got you
Um,
first.
I do 5 tours a year. So there's one coming up on February 1st. That's a Tu B'Shvat, which is the Jewish New Year of the trees, like tree tour. And then I do 2 general tree tours in the spring that are focused on spring flowering trees, and 2 in the fall that are for fall trees.
I love that.
Oh, thanks
Well,
everybody.
we'll have to get more of you. So thank you so much, Aaron,
Yeah,
and
thanks so
excited
much.
to see you again in May. So,
Yes, me too. Looking forward to that.
yes, thank you so much for all you do and very excited. Everyone loved hearing about big trees. I know I did. So,
Thanks everyone.
yep, and we'll share this recording when we're done. So, if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me or I'll share Aaron's contact later. So,
Great.
thank you all.
Thanks everyone.